Christmas dinner had barely ended when my brother stood up with his wine glass raised high above his head. The room got quiet instantly. All the scattered conversations stopped mid-sentence. He looked around the table slowly, making eye contact with each person like he was about to make an important announcement. Then he smiled that confident smile he always wore and said I was the most ungrateful person in the family. He said it like he was making a toast at a wedding. A few people laughed nervously, unsure if it was a joke. Others nodded slightly like they'd been thinking the same thing. I sat there completely frozen, fork halfway to my mouth, wondering if I'd actually heard him correctly. But the look on his face told me everything I needed to know. He meant every word. He wanted everyone to hear it, wanted them to absorb it as fact. My chest tightened painfully. I put my fork down as slowly as possible, trying not to make any sudden movements that might draw more attention. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls were pressing in from all sides. I didn't say anything back because I'd learned years ago that defending myself only made things infinitely worse. It gave him more ammunition, more proof that I was difficult and defensive. So I stayed completely quiet and stared at my plate while my face burned hot with shame. He didn't stop there though. Of course he didn't. He kept going, building his case against me piece by piece. He reminded everyone about the time he loaned me money for car repairs 2 years ago. He mentioned helping me move into my apartment 3 years back, making it sound like he'd carried every box himself. He brought up the time he gave me his old laptop when mine died, leaving out that it was already broken. Each example came with a little shake of his head, like he couldn't believe he'd been so generous with someone so completely unappreciative. A few relatives nodded along sympathetically. I saw my aunt glance at me with something like pity mixed with disappointment. My uncle looked down at his plate uncomfortably. Nobody defended me. Nobody asked if his version was the complete truth. They just listened and absorbed it like undeniable facts. I wanted to scream that the car loan came with interest and constant guilt trips. That he'd complained bitterly the entire time he helped me move, making me feel worse than if I'd hired movers. That the laptop was completely broken and I'd spent $200 getting it fixed. But I didn't say any of that. I'd tried correcting his stories before at other dinners, other holidays, other family gatherings. It never worked in my favor. Growing up, he was always the one everyone automatically believed without question. He talked louder than me, commanded attention naturally. He remembered specific details better, could cite dates and times. He could make himself sound completely reasonable even when he wasn't being fair at all. I was quieter by nature. I second-guessed myself constantly. I hated conflict with every fiber of my being. That combination made me an easy target for his narratives. When we were kids and something went wrong, he'd explain his way out of it smoothly while I stumbled over my words and got flustered. Mom and Dad always sided with whoever sounded more confident and put together. That was always him. By the time I was a teenager, I'd completely stopped trying to compete with his version of events. I just accepted that in our family his truth mattered infinitely more than mine ever would. Every single family gathering followed the exact same predictable pattern. He'd make some pointed comment about me. Everyone would laugh or nod knowingly. I'd smile tightly and desperately change the subject. It was so much easier than fighting a battle I knew I'd lose. But it hollowed me out a little more each time, chipping away at who I was. I'd tried defending myself in the past, back when I still had hope. Once, at Thanksgiving 2 years ago, I actually spoke up when he claimed I never helped with family events or contributed anything meaningful. I carefully listed everything I'd done that year, trying to keep my voice calm and factual. Everyone just stared at me like I was causing an unnecessary scene and ruining the holiday mood. He just sighed dramatically and said I was proving his exact point by getting so defensive and worked up over nothing. After that incident, people avoided me for the rest of the night like I was contagious. I learned then that pushing back only made me look worse in everyone's eyes, made me seem petty and bitter. So that Christmas, I did what I'd learned to do. I stayed completely silent. I let him finish his entire speech without interruption. I let the words sink deep into everyone's minds until they became the official family story. My brother the generous helper who gave endlessly, me the ungrateful burden who took everything and appreciated nothing. It was a role I'd been assigned years ago and I honestly didn't know how to escape it anymore. When he finally sat back down, the relief in the room was obvious and immediate. People could go back to eating their food. I noticed Grandma watching him carefully though. She sat at her usual spot at the end of the table by the big window overlooking the backyard. She didn't interrupt him during his speech. She didn't shake her head disapprovingly or roll her eyes, but her jaw tightened just slightly. Her fingers gripped her water glass a little harder than necessary. I noticed because Grandma was the only person in our entire family who ever really paid genuine attention. Not just to what people said out loud, but to what they carefully didn't say. She'd lived through enough family drama over 8 decades to recognize all the patterns. She'd watched my brother operate and manipulate for years now, but she'd never said anything publicly about it. She believed deeply in family unity, in keeping peace at all costs. I'd always wondered if she saw through him completely or if she believed his version like everyone else seemed to. That night, watching her face closely, I realized she saw exactly what was happening. She just hadn't decided yet whether to actually do anything about it. Her eyes met mine for just a second across the cluttered table. Something passed between us in that brief moment, understanding maybe, or sympathy. Then she looked back at him and her expression went carefully, deliberately blank, unreadable. My brother wrapped up his little speech by saying that Christmas was really about gratitude when you thought about it. That it was about genuinely appreciating what people did for you and not taking things for granted. He said some people just didn't understand that basic concept, no matter how many times you tried to teach them. He didn't say my name again, but everyone knew exactly who he meant. Every single person at that table knew. He sat down looking extremely pleased with himself, like he'd just delivered an important life lesson everyone needed to hear. A few people nodded in agreement. Someone murmured something about the true importance of family appreciation. Someone else agreed enthusiastically. The conversation shifted away from me finally, mercifully. But the damage was completely done. I could feel it hanging in the air like smoke. The way people weren't quite looking at me anymore. The way conversations paused awkwardly when I was nearby. He'd poisoned the entire evening perfectly, made absolutely sure everyone saw me through his carefully crafted lens. I picked at my food mechanically and waited for an acceptable amount of time to pass so I could leave without making it obvious I was fleeing. The ham tasted like dust in my mouth. The potatoes stuck in my throat. Someone made a joke about Black Friday shopping and the crazy deals they'd found. A few people laughed gratefully, relieved to have a safer topic. The tension in the room started to ease gradually. Everyone wanted desperately to move past the awkwardness. Pretend it hadn't just happened. That was exactly how our family had always worked. Ignore all the uncomfortable parts and focus entirely on appearing normal and functional. I excused myself quietly to help clear plates from the table. Nobody objected or offered to help. In the kitchen, I rinsed dishes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The hot water scalded my fingers, but I didn't bother adjusting the temperature. The physical pain felt somehow better than the emotional kind, burning in my chest. I heard laughter drifting in from the dining room. They'd already moved on, already forgotten what just happened. But I was still stuck in that exact moment when my brother stood up and reduced me to absolutely nothing in front of everyone who mattered. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I blinked hard and focused on scrubbing a plate with unnecessary force. I wouldn't cry at Christmas dinner. I absolutely wouldn't give him that satisfaction. The plate slipped from my wet hands and clattered loudly in the sink. I froze completely, hoping nobody heard. That's when Grandma's voice cut clearly through from the living room. She called my brother's name, not loud or angry, just firm and commanding. The kind of voice that made everyone immediately stop talking and listen. I froze at the sink, water still running over my hands. The dining room went completely quiet. I heard chair legs scraping against the floor, footsteps moving. I dried my hands slowly on a dish towel and moved to the doorway where I could see everything but not be seen myself. Grandma sat in her armchair, the one with the worn blue cushion she'd had for 30 years and refused to replace. My brother stood near the fireplace looking confused but not worried yet. He still thought he was completely in control of the situation. Grandma reached into her cardigan pocket with a trembling hand. She was 82 and rarely confronted anyone directly about anything. This wasn't like her at all. My heart started pounding hard against my ribs. I had absolutely no idea what was coming, but I could tell it was something big, something that would change everything. The whole room held its breath collectively. Even the Christmas tree lights seemed to dim. Grandma pulled out her phone, the old flip phone she'd finally learned to use 2 years ago after much patient teaching. She asked if he remembered calling her the week before Christmas. Her voice was steady and calm. He shrugged casually and said they talked all the time. What specific call was she referring to? His tone was dismissive, like she was just being a confused old lady who couldn't keep things straight. A few people in the room shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Grandma nodded slowly, deliberately. She didn't look confused at all. She looked completely clear and focused in a way that made my stomach drop. She said she wanted to play something for everyone, something important. My brother's smile faltered just slightly around the edges. He asked what exactly she was talking about, his voice a bit sharper now. She didn't answer his question. She just opened her phone with careful, deliberate movements. The room was so quiet I could hear the heater humming in the background. My aunt cleared her throat nervously. My uncle set down his coffee cup carefully. Everyone was watching now with complete attention. Grandma held up the phone so everyone could see she was completely serious. Then she said clearly that she thought everyone should hear what he really sounded like when he thought nobody else would ever know. My brother's face changed instantly. The color drained from his cheeks. Grandma's hand hovered over the play button for a long moment. She reminded him gently but firmly that he was the one who sent it to her, that he personally chose to leave that message on her voicemail. He tried to laugh it off, saying she was confused about something, probably mixing up conversations. But his eyes were genuinely panicked now. He looked around the room desperately for support, but everyone was staring at Grandma's phone. Waiting. I pressed myself against the doorframe, barely breathing at all. I had absolutely no idea what was on that phone, but I knew my brother's face. I'd studied it my whole life, I knew that look. It was the exact expression he got when he realized he couldn't talk his way out of something, when his usual tactics wouldn't work. Grandma took a slow, deliberate breath, then she pressed play. The room filled with his voice, but it wasn't the smooth, reasonable voice from 10 minutes ago. This voice was sharp and bitter, angry in a way I'd never heard before, raw and unfiltered. He was complaining about me, about how much I'd cost him over the years, how tired he was of me being part of the family at all, how he genuinely wished I'd just disappear and stop being such a constant burden. The words hit like physical punches. The voicemail kept playing and everyone stayed frozen. He said I was completely pathetic for always needing help with everything, that I made the whole family look bad by association, that he was absolutely sick of playing the good brother role when I gave him nothing meaningful in return. His voice got progressively meaner as it went on, more vicious and cruel. He used words I'd never heard him say before, called me things I wouldn't dare repeat out loud. Said he'd been waiting years for someone to finally see what I really was. That's exactly why he'd made absolutely sure to bring it up at Christmas dinner specifically. Maximum audience, maximum damage, he'd planned it. The room was completely still. Nobody moved a muscle, nobody looked away. They just listened to this voice that didn't match the person they thought they knew. My brother stood frozen by the fireplace like a statue. His face was bright red now. His hands opened and closed uselessly at his sides. He tried to speak, but nothing came out except a strangled sound. The voicemail kept going relentlessly. He complained that Grandma always took my side unfairly, that she was too soft on me, that everyone in the family enabled my complete uselessness. Then finally, mercifully, it ended. The silence that followed felt absolutely explosive. The shift in the room was instant and dramatic. People who'd been nodding along to his speech just 10 minutes ago now stared at him with completely different eyes. My aunt's mouth hung open slightly in shock. My uncle looked genuinely angry. Mom pressed her hand to her chest like she'd been physically struck. Dad's jaw was tight with tension. They were all recalculating everything they'd just heard, re-evaluating every single story he'd ever told them about me. My brother's carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time and everyone was watching it happen. I stayed in the doorway, invisible and forgotten for the moment. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about them realizing who he really was underneath the performance. Someone touched Grandma's shoulder gently, supportively. She didn't react. She just carefully closed her phone and put it back in her pocket with steady hands. Her hands were steadier now than before. Like she'd been carrying this weight and had finally set it down properly. Nobody spoke. The Christmas tree lights blinked red and green, the clock on the wall ticked loudly. Someone's stomach growled, but nobody broke the silence. They were all processing, rewriting history in their minds, seeing the past through completely new eyes. My brother finally found his voice. He jumped forward suddenly, hands raised like he was surrendering to police. He said it was taken completely out of context, that he'd been stressed that week about work, that everyone said things they didn't mean when they were overwhelmed and not thinking clearly. His words tumbled out fast and desperate. He looked at Mom, at Dad, at anyone who might possibly save him from this. But nobody moved to help him. Nobody jumped to his defense. He tried to explain that he'd only called Grandma to vent privately, that he never meant for anyone else to hear it, that it wasn't fair to judge him for a private moment. His voice got higher with each excuse. Grandma didn't argue with him. She didn't defend herself or explain her reasoning. She just let him talk until he completely ran out of steam. Then she said quietly but clearly that she'd tried to talk to him about it the day after he left the message. That she'd asked him to apologize to me, that he'd asked her to delete the voicemail instead. She said she thought about it, almost did it. But then she realized the truth mattered more than his comfort. Her voice trembled slightly when she said that last part. But she didn't look away from him, didn't back down even slightly. She said she'd spent too many years watching him control narratives and twist stories to his advantage, watching him make me into something I wasn't so he could look better by comparison. She'd stayed quiet because she thought family peace mattered more than individual truth. But listening to that voicemail, hearing the genuine cruelty in his voice, she realized she'd been wrong all along. Staying quiet wasn't keeping peace, it was enabling harm, it was choosing his comfort over my dignity. The room absorbed her words slowly, people processing at different speeds. A few people looked genuinely ashamed, others looked angry. At him or at themselves, I couldn't tell. My brother's face cycled through emotions rapidly. Anger, shame, panic, defiance. He opened his mouth to argue, but Grandma held up one hand to stop him. She said she wasn't interested in more explanations or excuses. The voicemail spoke clearly enough. What people chose to do with that information was entirely up to them. Then she stood carefully, using the armrest for balance, and walked to the kitchen. She passed me in the doorway and squeezed my hand once before disappearing around the corner. For the first time in his entire life, my brother looked genuinely small, powerless. He scanned the room desperately, searching for someone who'd defend him, someone who'd say Grandma was being unreasonable or unfair, someone who'd restore his carefully crafted image. He found nothing but averted eyes. Mom and Dad wouldn't meet his gaze. My aunt was whispering urgently to my uncle. Cousins stared at their phones suddenly. Nobody wanted to be associated with him now. Nobody wanted to be the one who backed the wrong person. I watched it happen from my spot in the doorway and felt something strange wash over me. Not joy exactly, not satisfaction, just a quiet sense of the universe correcting itself, of truth finally being louder than his version. He'd spent years building this image of himself as the good son, the generous brother, the reliable one everyone could count on. And Grandma had demolished it completely in under 3 minutes. Not with arguments or accusations, just by letting him reveal himself, his own words, his own voice, his own cruelty. There was nothing left to hide behind now. No excuses that would work. No explanations that would erase what everyone had just heard. Someone finally spoke up, breaking the suffocating silence. My cousin asked why he'd been helping me all these years, if he genuinely felt that way about me, if he really thought I was such a burden and so completely pathetic. The question hung in the air like a direct challenge. My brother stammered, started to answer, stopped, started again. He couldn't explain it without admitting that his help had always come with invisible strings, with resentment, with the expectation that it would earn him moral superiority and family approval. He couldn't say that out loud though, so he just stood there, mouth opening and closing, looking more lost by the second. Dad cleared his throat loudly, asked if the voicemail was really how he felt about his own sibling. My brother looked at Dad with desperate, pleading eyes, said it was complicated, that family relationships were complicated and messy. Dad's expression hardened noticeably. He said it sounded pretty simple to him actually. Either you care about your family or you use them to make yourself look good to others. My brother flinched like he'd been physically slapped. The silence pressed in again, heavier this time, absolutely suffocating. I could see him realizing there was no way out of this. I didn't say anything through all of this. I didn't defend myself or attack him or try to control the narrative for once. I just stood there quietly and watched it unfold. For years I'd thought I needed to fight back to prove myself, to make people see the truth through my efforts. But Grandma showed me something completely different. Sometimes you just need to step back and let people reveal themselves. The truth doesn't need defending, it just needs space to exist. My brother had hung himself with his own words. All Grandma did was hold up the rope he'd tied. I felt lighter suddenly. Like I'd been carrying something incredibly heavy for years and hadn't realized it until now. The weight of trying to be believed, trying to be seen, trying to matter. I didn't need to try anymore. The truth had spoken for itself more powerfully than I ever could. My brother glanced at me finally. Our eyes met across the room. I saw something in his face I'd never seen before, not just shame or embarrassment, recognition. Like he was seeing me as a real person for the first time instead of just a supporting character in his story. Like he was realizing I had thoughts and feelings that mattered. After that, dinner ended quickly. People gathered their things with awkward efficiency, avoiding eye contact. A few relatives pulled me aside on their way out. My aunt hugged me tightly and whispered that she was genuinely sorry, that she should have listened better over the years. My uncle squeezed my shoulder and said he'd been wrong to go along with things. A cousin I barely knew asked if I was okay, really okay. I nodded because I was. For the first time in years, I actually was. These apologies came in low voices, private and ashamed. Nobody wanted to admit publicly that they'd been part of the problem, that they'd chosen comfort over truth, that they'd let my brother define me because it was easier than questioning him. But at least they were saying it now. At least they were trying to make it right. I accepted their words without making them feel worse. I wasn't interested in punishing anyone. I just wanted to breathe without constantly defending my existence. My brother stayed near the front door, phone in his hand, pretending to be busy with something. Nobody approached him. Nobody said goodbye. The invisible circle around him grew wider as people left. The confidence he'd walked in with was completely gone now. He looked smaller somehow, diminished, not just in everyone else's eyes but in his own. I could see it in the way he held himself, the way he avoided looking at anything directly. He'd built his entire identity on being better than me, smarter, more capable, more deserving of love and attention, and now that foundation was completely cracked, he didn't know who to be without it anymore. Part of me felt sorry for him. A small part, but mostly I felt free from his version of me, free from the role he'd assigned me, free from the constant weight of being misunderstood and misrepresented. When the last guests left, he grabbed his coat without saying goodbye to anyone. Mom tried to stop him, asked him to stay and talk things through. He shook his head and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. The house felt different without him. Quieter but not empty, just peaceful. Dad sat down heavily on the couch. Mom stood by the window. Nobody knew what to say. We all just existed in that strange space where everything had changed. When everyone was finally gone, Grandma found me still in the kitchen. She hugged me longer than usual. Her small frame pressed against mine. She smelled like lavender and peppermint tea like always. She said she was sorry she hadn't stepped in sooner, that she'd known for years what was happening but thought staying neutral was the right thing to do. She said watching him humiliate me at Christmas dinner had broken something in her, made her realize that silence wasn't neutral. It was taking his side. I told her she stepped in when it mattered most, that timing mattered less than truth. She pulled back and looked at me with watery eyes, said I was stronger than anyone gave me credit for, that she was proud of how I'd handled everything over the years. I didn't feel strong. I felt exhausted and wrung out and strangely empty, but I appreciated her saying it more than I could express. We stood there in the kitchen for a while, not talking, just existing together. The dishwasher hummed, the clock ticked. Outside, snow started falling gently against the dark window. The next few weeks were strange and uncomfortable. Family group chats that were usually full of my brother's commentary went completely quiet. Nobody tagged him in photos anymore. Invitations to gatherings didn't include his usual additions and opinions about everything. It was like everyone was collectively deciding how to navigate this new reality. Some people reached out to me privately, asked how I was doing, apologized again for not seeing it sooner. I appreciated it but also felt weird about it, like I'd suddenly become a project, a wrong they needed to right to feel better about themselves. I just wanted to move forward, to be normal instead of either invisible or a cause. My brother tried to reach out once, a short text message saying things got misunderstood at Christmas, that he hoped we could talk when I was ready. I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond. To try one more time to have a real relationship with him. But I knew better now. Some people don't change. They just learn to hide better. I deleted the message without responding and felt nothing. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to fix things with him. Didn't feel guilty for not trying harder. Didn't feel responsible for the gap between us. He'd created that gap with his own actions, his own words, his own choices over years. It wasn't my job to bridge it anymore. That realization felt like setting down something I'd been carrying since childhood. The weight of being the understanding one. The flexible one. The one who absorbed his cruelty and tried to see his side of things. I didn't have to do that anymore. I could just exist without constantly managing his feelings or his image of me. It felt revolutionary. Mom called a few times, asked if I'd consider family therapy with him. I said no. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't see the point. You can't therapy your way out of someone fundamentally not respecting you as a person. She didn't push. I think she understood. Or maybe she was just tired of managing conflicts she didn't create. Either way, she stopped asking, and I appreciated that more than I could say. Without my brother's constant framing, my relationships with other relatives slowly started to normalize. Conversations felt lighter, less loaded with hidden meanings. People asked about my life without that undercurrent of pity or judgment. They listened when I talked instead of just waiting for me to finish so they could move on. It was strange at first. I kept bracing for the other shoe to drop, for someone to bring up the old narratives about me being difficult or ungrateful. But they didn't. Slowly, I started to relax, started to trust that maybe I could just be myself without constantly defending who that was. My cousin invited me to her birthday party and actually seemed happy when I said yes. My uncle asked for my opinion on a work project he was struggling with. Small things, normal things, things that shouldn't have felt revolutionary but absolutely did. I was being seen as a whole person for the first time, not just in relation to my brother. Not just as the ungrateful one or the difficult one, just me. It felt fragile, like something I could break if I moved wrong, but it also felt real. At the next family gathering, Easter dinner, nobody brought up Christmas at all. But the difference was obvious to everyone. People included me in conversations naturally, asked follow-up questions about things I'd mentioned weeks before. Remembered details. My brother didn't come. Mom said he was busy with something. Nobody asked for details or seemed concerned. It was like there was a collective unspoken agreement to move forward instead of dwelling on the past. I appreciated that approach. I didn't need anyone to keep rehashing what happened or telling me they were on my side now. I just needed things to be different going forward, and they were. Dad asked about my job and seemed genuinely interested in my answer. My aunt wanted to know about a book I'd mentioned reading, normal family stuff, the kind of stuff I'd watched happen around me for years while being excluded from it. Now I was part of it. The food tasted better. The jokes felt funner. I didn't spend the whole time braced for an attack. For the first time at a family dinner, I felt like I belonged, not because I'd proven anything, just because people were finally seeing me clearly. Grandma caught my eye from across the room at one point during dessert. She smiled, not a sad smile or a sympathetic one, just a genuine, warm smile full of understanding. I smiled back and felt something settle deep in my chest. Some truths only surface when you stop defending yourself, when you stop trying to convince people of your worth and just let them see who people really are underneath the performance. My brother had revealed himself completely that Christmas. Not because anyone forced him to, just because Grandma gave his own words a platform. Sometimes that's all it takes. The truth doesn't need arguments or evidence or dramatic confrontations. It just needs to be heard. I'd spent years trying to make people understand my side of things, but the moment I stopped trying, the moment I just existed and let him keep talking, everything shifted. He'd built his image on tearing mine down. And when that foundation cracked, there was nothing left holding him up. I wasn't happy about it exactly, but I was free from it, and that felt like enough. The snow had melted completely. Spring was coming. Everything felt possible again in a way it hadn't in years.